Good evening and welcome to our look at this month's session at the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Later in the programme, could shale gas help to solve Europe's energy dependency? The European Parliament calls for robust rules, but some MEPs say the drilling method involved is far too risky. We'll also hear calls for more to be done to make Europe's children safer on the internet. But first, the conflict between Israel and Hamas has held the world's attention this week, with repeated calls for both sides to halt the violence. The civilian death toll in Gaza has spiralled following Israeli air attacks, and Hamas rockets continued to target Israeli citizens. It's a conflict on Europe's doorstep, but what impact has the EU had in exercising its influence? In a few moments, we'll get the views of two MEPs who've been following developments closely. But first, here's a quick look at what happened during the European Parliament debate.
Europe's Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton wasn't in Strasbourg for the debate. Instead, it began with the Cypriot Foreign Minister condemning the Hamas attack on a Tel Aviv bus.
The European Union reiterates its strong and unequivocal condemnation of all forms and acts of terrorism.
MEPs heard of the ceasefire during their debate. Belgian socialist Veronique de Keyser said the truce was a relief. She went on to express concern about Israel's security, but said a Palestinian homeland was part of the solution. Green leader French MEP Daniel Cohn-Bendit said Europe had to back the Israeli and Palestinian right to have and defend their own state. He also called for support for Palestinian recognition as an observer at the United Nations. However, one British MEP made it clear he blamed Hamas for the escalation in violence.
The recent hostilities between Hamas and Israel over the last week are an avoidable human tragedy. They came about from the escalation of Gaza-launched rocket attacks, including longer-range Iranian ones now, on Israel, with indiscriminate targeting of civilian areas, resulting in 5 civilian deaths in Israel and damage to infrastructure. Every state has the right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, so Israel is fully entitled to seek out all legitimate military targets, including rocket launch sites and ammunition dumps, which it has done on a surgical basis. Hamas disgracefully sited its launchers in densely populated civilian areas, which make it guilty of another war crime.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tannock. Are you ready to answer for a blue card?
Always ready to answer a blue card, Mr. President.
Always. Mr. Murphy, you have the right.
Well, Mr. Murphy, my friend Mr. Murphy. It's always Mr. Murphy who's mischief-making on the other side of the House.
Thank you, President. Mr. Tannock, do you really think that this onslaught against the people of Gaza has anything whatsoever to do with the protection of Israeli people? Do you not see the connection between this onslaught and the elections in January? Do you not know that this immediate upturn of struggle, of conflict, has come about after the killing of a 12-year-old boy who was playing soccer in Gaza? And how can you describe surgical strikes that kill 150 Palestinians, the majority of whom are civilians, a number of whom are children? How are they possibly surgical?
I'm joined now by Irish MEP Emer Costello, who's chair of the European Parliament's delegation to the Palestinian Council, and by Portuguese MEP Mario David, who's a member of the European Parliament's Committee on Foreign Affairs. Emer Costello, if I could start with you. We've heard from the Cypriot presidency that there is now to be a ceasefire, which is obviously a positive development, but it was a long time coming and both sides seem to be going at it right up to the wire, really.
Well, that's right. Well, first of all, the ceasefire that was announced is very, very welcome. Too many people, too many innocent lives have been lost. The Universal Day for Children was earlier this week, and on the same day an announcement came that 1/3 of the victims of the struggle were actually children. This is really absolutely appalling. So while the news is welcome that we have a ceasefire, it's been a long term coming, but I think that we need to see the terms of the ceasefire. I think we need to see how that's going to actually build and develop into a sustainable peace, because that's what's really important, is developing the peace process in the region.
And Mario David, what are the prospects for that ceasefire, given both sides really are seemingly intent on making the most of every minute that remained?
I don't want to be naughty, but I don't believe in the ceasefires. We have seen so many of them over the years. I mean, if they last, the better. But they just precede the next fight, the next bombing, the next missile that is launched by one side or the other, and unfortunately this is going on for too long. And I think that the core of the problem is not being addressed. I mean, we are worried, of course, one death is a death too much, that's for sure. But what we have to address is the question of the Middle East peace process and the future of the relations between two populations that have to live together, side by side, and if they can do it in peace, the better.
Well, I suppose they're the underlying causes, but let's talk about the timing. Why did the hostilities get ratcheted up right now? I think we can look at a cartoon. It first appeared in a Swiss newspaper, I think, and the strong suggestion from that is that really what's happening here is the build-up to the next Israeli election.
That's right. There are Israeli elections will take place in January, and they're going to be very fiercely contested. I was in Tel Aviv last month, and I know that many of the issues that Israelis are facing are bread and butter economic issues, and they will be holding their government to account on the economic issues. But sometimes it's always useful to pull the to pull the Palestinian issue out of the pocket at that time, at the time of elections, and that's actually a worry that it can be used as an election ploy. The other aspect about the timing of it, though, that I think is interesting that hasn't really been explored is the fact that on the 29th of November there will be a vote at the UN Assembly for Palestinian non-member state observer status. And that's going to be a hugely important vote, and there's a lot of pressure on European countries and across the globe really not to support that, not to support the Palestinian bid. So I think that the developments in Gaza may have an impact on that vote at the UN next week as well.
And of course, Mario David, I suppose it has to be seen in terms of the wider Middle Eastern context, in that the Hamas rockets we know are coming from Iran, and it's not that difficult to argue that it quite suits Iran to distract the international community from what's been going on in Syria.
Exactly. I mean, you already said I was going to continue on what Elmar was saying, and I was going to follow in this direction. There are the problems in Syria, and this also has distracted and has united the Arab world, which is absolutely normal. There are the questions of Iran. We all know that these missiles, the GR-5, are from Iranian origin, and they can go much further than they used to, the ones that Hamas used to work with. And I think also, to complete, to try to say something more, I think that Hamas is also using the fact that on the 29th of November there will be this vote in the General Assembly of the United Nations in order to jeopardize the position of the Palestinian Authority on this issue.
Which, of course, is led by their political rivals.
Well, by Hamas, yeah, or by Fatah. The Palestinian Authority is led by Fatah. And I have to say that President Abbas has behaved absolutely in an exemplary way throughout the conflict, and his message of trying to seek a peace solution really advanced the cause of the two-state solution, which allows the Palestinians, on the one hand, have their right for statehood completely vindicated, and at the same time it recognises that the Israelis have the right to live securely within their borders.
Why do we seem to have so little clout with the Israelis when incidents like this happen? We find it very difficult to make our voice heard as a European Union, don't we?
Ray, I think it's extremely important to say also that Israel is the only democracy in the area, right? And I don't think there is any point in discussing who did the first shot, whether it was the shot from some jihadists against a bus or a truck with 3 Israeli soldiers, or if it was the attack and killing of the chief Jabari, the leader of the Hamas military wing. What I think it's important is for Europe, for once, to take the responsibilities it has in this issue. You know, this is going to be one of the hot potatoes of the Irish presidency that's coming next January, and I really trust the wisdom of the Taoiseach Enda Kenny, because Enda is one of the few prime ministers who really knows exactly what's going on in the Middle East, and I think that I know his position. I subscribe to it, and I think that it's not because we are masochists or we are naive. We know how important it is. We know how difficult it is, but I think that we have to be a player and not only a payer as far as this conflict goes on. And I think after the failure of the Americans, the Russians cannot play any deal here. I think it's up to the Europeans to try to achieve a long-lasting peace process.
Emer Costello, you've, shall we say, links to the Department of Foreign Affairs at home. So what should the Irish EU presidency do to make its voice heard in this region?
I think that the Irish presidency will actually prioritise this issue. I might just say too that the 14th of May, the Foreign Affairs Council issued very serious conclusions on the Palestinian and Israeli situation. And sometimes while we think that our words or the conclusions don't have any impact, my understanding from talking to people on both sides, both the Israelis and the Palestinians, they say that the 14th of May conclusions had major reverberations in the region. The EU must ensure that Israel, on the one hand, adheres to international law, and there are a number of issues such as the settlements, the whole issue around the Bedouins, which was the purpose of my study visit last month, the dual planning system that seems to be in place, the destruction of many EU-funded projects, and that's a place that certainly we can start. The Israelis have destroyed and demolished many EU-funded structures, and I think that we have to take the lead and put pressure on the Israelis to respect the rights of the Palestinians.
What about putting pressure on Hamas too? Because again, under international law, it's very easy to suggest that they really did not do enough to protect civilians.
Absolutely. I think that in all cases, civilians have to the civilians in the area, and particularly civilians in Gaza, have to be the priority. And one of the main planks of our presidency should be to see what we can do to try and get the internal reconciliation back on track. There's a political vacuum in the Palestinian region at the moment as well. We have had promises of elections, but there are no elections. And I think that elections are not going to be forthcoming until we advance the reconciliation as well. So that's something that's going to be very important.
Mario David, very briefly, realistically, assuming the ceasefire holds, it is at best a sticking plaster. And unless those underlying problems are tackled very seriously by the international community, including the European Union, a major donor in the region, we're going to be having this discussion on and on and on over the years.
All over again. I mean, in a couple of months, in a couple of years, we're still going to be here. But there's one detail that I think is extremely important. We have either a two-state solution or a one-state solution, right? If the two-state solution applies, which is the one I think that we favor, that the Israelis should favor, and that the Palestinian Authority certainly does, we have to guarantee peace and prosperity for the two sides. But if this doesn't, then we have one-state solution. And in one-state solution, then the demography will change the image of Israel, right? And if Israel wants to continue to be a democracy, as we hope, I mean, this is a much worse solution than the two-state solution that we are talking about. And I think there is a word that kills, and that this word is apartheid. I'm sure that they will never apply it in Israel. But let's look at the demographics and look how dangerous it is not to go for a permanent two-state solution as soon as possible.
All right, we'll leave it there. Mario David and Emer Costello, thank you.